This is day one to influential, trusted authority with a podcast. Two common questions that I'm often asked about podcasting, and these are in the order that I'm often asked these. Where do I start, Anne-Marie? And what microphone should I get? And if that's what's led you here today, then something that I was asked by one of the change makers right here inside our Podcasting with Purpose community, she asked me, are there any differences between podcasting and podcasting as a business owner, as a coach, as a consultant, a service-based expert who is bringing your knowledge to a podcast so that you can build a relationship with your audience, who I'm assuming is your ideal client, so that you can continue to build know, like, and trust. And eventually that listener, that audience member will join your community, start stalking you across all other platforms. And then when you have that call to action at the right time, when they're ready, that they will step forward. And so I said, a great question, Michelle. And the answer is yes, yes, yes. To leverage a podcast as a service-based business, as an expert, a trusted authority, to build your reach with your ideal client, your reputation as that influential, trusted authority, as well as revenue, nurturing your listeners into leads, inquiries, and ultimately paying customers. You know, when you think launching a podcast is pretty simple, isn't it? We've got a device, we've got lots of technology, far more technology at our fingertips now than when I first started back in 2008, that's for sure. But whilst it's relatively simple, if we compare launching a podcast to launching a business, starting a business is relatively simple these days too, isn't it? But building a business that's profitable, that attracts your ideal clients, that enables you to sustain your energy, because many of us are working one-on-one with clients, aren't we? The way we generate income is to share knowledge, and we don't want to burn out. We don't want to undercharge, all of those things as a coach. And so there's a difference between building a business that you're going to get paid what you're worth. You're going to attract the high level clients who value your worth, value your expertise, and value paying and investing in themselves through investing in your programs and packages. There's a difference. And just like building a business, a coaching practice, a consulting practice takes foundations, core business foundations, I call them. There's foundations for your podcast as well. The things that you want to start thinking about is, am I ready to start a podcast yet? Or do I need to focus on some things first? So here are 3 indicators that maybe you need to just hold off and start to work on this first. Firstly, your message isn't cutting through the noise. So if I hear someone that says to me, well, Anne-Marie, I've heard podcasting is a great way to amplify my message, and so that's why I'm starting a podcast. And I hear, well, what are you doing with your current marketing? Well, I'm doing this, this, and this, but it's just not landing. It's just not cutting through the noise. That rings alarm bells for me, because if your message isn't cutting through the noise already in how you're sharing your message, and you launch a podcast with the same message, you're just going to amplify the message that's not already working to many more people. So you're going to have an even greater, a bigger audience, I should say, with more people who are unsure about what you do. So focus on your message first. You'll hear that time and time again. Number 2, you're not sure on your niche. And I'm sure you've heard that over and over. You know, the riches are in the niches. We call them niche here. But you need to know, where are you putting your flag in the sand to say, this is the space that I want to own. This is where I want to start to speak into. This is where I want to really position myself as that influential, trusted authority. If you're not sure on the topic and in the marketplace, the small demographic of marketplace that you want to really focus on, then they're not going to be sure about it either. So get some clarity around that first. I'm just working with someone at the moment who's finally found where she really wants to start to bring the voice. And so one of the things that we do we're working on her message offering offering at the moment, is to start sharing some of that across social, and it exploded. And so people were commenting and saying, yeah, that is so true. And when a conversation happens like that, you know you're in the right place and your message is really landing well. And so that's why for her it was a great indication. Yep, this is where I'm supposed to really be and support clients. And number 3, you're not sure on the end in mind. The end in mind is very much thinking about your business model, who you support, the programs that you offer, and where best you need to focus your attention when you think about the customer journey. Give you an example. I was speaking to a company over in the UK, and they said to me, look, if we were to incorporate a podcast in the marketing that we're doing, we don't necessarily need to get a lot of new business. It's because we only take on 4 new clients every single year. And we know that with those 4 clients, if we do a really good job in the first 12 months, that client will continue to be a high level client for many years to come, being multiple 6-figure, business contracts to them, each client. So for them, if they looked at the customer journey, it was not really to bring new leads in, but rather to incorporate a podcast that would have been best suited to really nurture the relationship with those existing customers who were onboarded in that 12 months, to really sow into them, so that at the end of that 12 months, that podcast was so strongly leveraged in the work that they were doing that it was an easy yes for those 4 clients to go, we want to become long-term clients. So that would have best suited for them. Others of you would like to have a podcast that creates more of an engagement with new leads rather than, your existing customer base. Some of you may do both. You might have a podcast that is very much out in the open, where you're really nurturing those listeners into leads from a cold. They're not necessarily knowing you yet they're searching. And then you may also incorporate a podcast that is just for members only, just for clients. So you keep that content private. So you see, it depends. What's your end in mind? Where best can you focus the podcast strategy to really nurture those listeners into leads? And only you will know that once you incorporate and you have a look at your business structure and where you want to go. Let's have a look at these 4 podcasting truths. Your microphone and technology will make the difference in having a successful podcast. Get the best microphone and your podcast will be a success. Not so, because as I always say, message before microphone, because you cannot edit and mix compelling content that converts, that nurtures your ideal client along that customer journey, building know, like, and trust from fluff and banter, even if it was recorded on the most expensive microphone. And you may have heard me say that over and over again, and it is so true, reminding you that it's so important to have that message land, because you can use a microphone. For years, I used a Logitech microphone. And so while I'm not saying that the audio, if it's too distracting, then people aren't going to listen. But if you've got just a microphone that captures, without any distractions in the background, you can do that on a Logitech headset. I did that for years. You don't necessarily need to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars. The message is way more important than microphone. The second podcasting mistruth, where they say your podcast will be a success, just publish it and clients will come. And as I mentioned earlier with Career Success Radio, that's exactly what we assume too. We got lots of great feedback from our podcast. Love your content, love that, love listening to you. But that wasn't generating any business. And so I hear that time and time again. We've launched our podcast. We continue to put a lot of money into it, yet we haven't really seen any returns. What are we missing? And it could be a number of things that I share today, and obviously ongoing in the next 9 days that we're going to spend together. So keep an eye out and an ear out to listen and watch to see, hey, maybe I need to really focus on this first before I launch that podcast. The third podcasting mistruth is this one. How do I get on new and noteworthy, Anne-Marie? Because I know that when that happens, my podcast is going to be a success. And to that I say, wrong. Vanity numbers are misleading. Sure, it's wonderful to get, to get listed. But I've heard time and time again of colleagues who've had lots of podcasts or have had podcasts with lots of downloads that have actually had to walk away because they didn't realize that it would be a real big success, but it wasn't really focused on their business model. It didn't focus on the customer journey, so that because it was two businesses that came together, they were talking about a particular topic that wasn't really focused on each other's business. Each business had a completely different focus altogether. So again, you think of your podcast as a vehicle, it's a brand communication tool, just one of the tools where you're building that relationship. And, if the step between getting off your podcast and onto your list, and as you're nurturing them, there's a disconnection there, people are just not going to make that step. Even if you do a call to action, it's going to feel a bit off actually, because, the content that you're sharing, the expertise that you're sharing is quite different from your business and what you're offering. And, I would say focus on building reputation equity so that you're seen as a trusted authority, an influential trusted authority. And I'm going to share with you my podcasting positioning quadrant shortly. Are you a trusted authority? And are you working your way up to that with the foundations you're putting into place? So I would much rather you have a smaller number of downloads, but those downloads are your ideal clients. They're engaging with your content. When you're sharing a call to action, which you do regularly, it's done in a way that it really is an expression of, hey, if this is something you're struggling with, I've got something that will help you. And they then take that next step. You'll generate so many results, far more results than just having, millions of downloads of people who are not really your ideal client and would never move forward. And the last mistruth is, hey, just press record, start talking. We've got some good questions to ask. And we're going to assume that these questions that we're asked are really going to create the content that is going to nurture that listener along the buyer's journey, along the customer journey. And if you compare your podcast to mainstream radio, where it's kind of like a chat show, it's not really the right approach if you're looking to build thought leadership and ultimately your business. And compelling conversations to what I call endless chatter to enhance that listener experience, that compelling conversation. There are certain things, language that you use, certain keywords, key phrases, those sorts of things you need to be really mindful of so that your podcast becomes a must listen to. And for you too, as the podcast host, there are reasons why people will listen to your podcast versus many other hundreds and hundreds of thousands of podcasts who are in your space because of you. All right, let's go briefly through these podcasting mistakes. And then I want to switch to the message, because as I mentioned, message before microphone. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit further today. But I'm sharing all of these mistakes and mistruths because some of you are also listening who've got a podcast and who are asking, why is my podcast not generating the results that I wanted? And it's probably because one or more of these things that we're talking about today isn't in place. And so then we're going to go through and start to share and talk about what you need to focus on, just to tweak slightly, or maybe for some of you who are starting from scratch, you'll know exactly the blueprint that you want to follow. Now, each of these 7 things are important individually, but together, so collectively, they're crucial. So if you miss the mark in one or more, it's going to impact everything. For instance, number 1 mistake is having an unclear or incorrect strategy for you when you look at your message and you look at your monetization strategy for your needs, your business model, and stage of business growth. That's really important. And so then you'll see that the next one, not having a lucrative niche, builds on that. If your strategy is incorrect, all of these other things are not going to matter. So you have to have that right strategy first. No lucrative niche. Do you know who your ideal client is? Do you know what keeps him or her up at night? Do you know the key phrases? And one of the things that I shared in a video, and I'm often saying to clients, if you're sharing the same message that you shared 2 years ago, your message needs to evolve. Because I'm sure that what's happened over the last 2 years has had your ideal client rethink what they're doing, probably brought up more challenges, more pressing challenges and problems that they need to deal with before they deal with, say, the bigger picture that you handled. So your message needs to change as well. far more competition now as well online, because so many coaches and consultants are now going online. Your clients are more often online now too, which is a good thing, but you've got more noise. So you have to be even clearer with your message. Very important. And that leads to mistake number 3, being unclear. If you were to be asked, where do you want to position yourself? What is your trusted authority in, or where do you want to build your reputation as that trusted authority in? If you can't define that and define it with a message that really underpins that, then that's what you want to focus on, so that you're really clear on that, and you can say it at the, just at a, if someone were to ask you, so what do you do? You're able to speak that, and your ideal client, if they were in earshot, would prick up their ears and say, hey, I think I need to listen to this person. Number 4, broad range of topics and or guests. I did this too. And by the way, I've done all of these mistakes over and over again, which is why I know that it's a mistake. I love learning lots of new things, but my topics and or guests weren't really positioned in a way that was to a specific niched audience. And you don't want to be in that position either. Off-brand podcast creators. What are podcast creators? The graphics, the cover art, the music, the tempo. You as, if you're doing your introduction, or you might have a voiceover professional that does that for you. Are they on brand? Do you know the experience that you want to create on your podcast? And are all of these podcast creatives building on that? Or are they a bit of a distraction? So these are things that are all very important. If people were to listen to your future, or if you've got a podcast already, your existing music, do they come up with the experience or how it would make them feel? That is intentionally what you wanted to do. I mean, I very much intentionally, with any of my music for my podcast, it has to have a certain beat. It has to really, set the stage. It has to be fun, dynamic, all of those different things. And I've even seen podcast guests who didn't realize that I could see them were really moving in their seat and clicking their hands and clapping their hands. And when I told them later, they were a little bit embarrassed, but I said, no, don't be embarrassed at all. But it creates that level of energy that I really want on my podcast with my guests. So everything is intentional. Number 6, uninspiring show or episode introductions. Those hosts that take forever and ever and ever to get to the point, and you're thinking, what benefit? What am I going to learn from this? If you're not sure and you don't tell them right at the beginning what they're going to learn, it's going to be very difficult for you to capture their attention. And I know for many of you, coaches and consultants, your ideal clients are busy, aren't they? And they might want to just come in, they might want to learn something. And as they're listening to you, you are continuing to build that know, like, and trust. But if you take forever to get to a topic, they may very well have gotten impatient and clicked off. So you want to make sure you capture them right at the beginning, continue that conversation in a compelling way that they cannot wait to continue to listen. And you're the first podcast that they want to listen to when you've released a new show, because they know that they're going to get value from the 20 or 30 minutes. For some of you, you might have a longer podcast as well. So that's important. And the last one is ineffective calls to action. We're going to talk about what's the best call to action coming up in another workshop. But, typically we have, subscribe to my podcast, share it with someone who may find it of benefit, leave a rating, subscribe, all of those different things. Whilst they're not bad, but there's more effective ways to get that person who may be a first-time listener off that podcast and onto your list, so that you can continue to build know, like, and trust off the list and in your community. Or because you're consistently inviting them to do so, after a little while they go, you know what, I'm going to do it. They've consistently provided real value. I can see that they're a real authority in their industry. I'm going to take that next step. You're consistently adding value. So these are the 7 mistakes. You may recognize one or more. And if you're only just in the beginning stages of your podcast, planning and seeing if this is the right move for you in your business and the right strategy, you'll have these in place so that you can tick these off to ensure that you do have all of these before you launch your podcast. So unclear or incorrect strategy, you do not want to come to a position where I interviewed someone once and they said, look, we just started a podcast and we said, we'll figure it out as we go along. And they got up to over 100 podcasts. So let's start out right and focusing on the right things so that you don't have to get to your 100+ episodes before you finally figure out a way in which to have the right strategy for your podcast. So this is the podcast positioning quadrant. And you'll notice that there's 4 quadrants there. There's an arrow going up the left-hand side, which is audience. So that is your audience, your ideal clients. And on the bottom is authority, and that is your reputation. Are you seen as that trusted authority? And we're going to go through very briefly what each of these means and what needs to be in place, or maybe not in place, that would have you fall or being ranked in that particular quadrant. So if we have a look at entertainer, this is where there's low audience and low authority. And I'm not saying that one of these is bad. You might just very well want to start a podcast to be a bit of an entertainer. There's no real audience that you're creating of like-minded people. They're just people that want to come and listen and then leave. Because, often on the show, there's a bit of entertainment there, but there's no real expertise. It's more entertainment. It's not educational. It's not empowering, but rather just pure entertainment. So, and you're not necessarily seen at all as an expert or a trusted authority. That's more the entertainer. Now, if you look at celebrity, whilst the authority is quite low, you would not hire or invest money in a celebrity quadrant here for someone to do your bookkeeping or represent you in a court of law or for health and wellness, whatever area of expertise that you're looking to invest in. However, you do particularly listen to them or someone that has a celebrity status because there's something about their personality, their charisma that is quite compelling. And so they have an audience who are able to, if you were to do a bit of an audit on them, that there are regular listeners or they have a similar core values. They just love the style. Maybe the style of the celebrity is quite controversial. Or the other way, the opposite way too, is it's something that the celebrity, the charisma that's created, the listener experience that draws, that attracts, that compels a certain type of audience to listen. But again, you wouldn't hire them because they're not really seen as an expert in anything or even a trusted authority in anything either. And celebrity, this is where you probably would be able to monetize your podcast with advertisers or sponsors because there are a certain demographic that you could say, well, these people kind of like this. But again, if you're a coach or a consultant, you're an expert, you're a specialist who is looking to leverage your podcast as a way to nurture listeners into leads and generate clients into your coaching programs and your consulting programs, then you don't want to be seen as that celebrity. You actually want to be seen as that trusted authority. So let's have a look at the third quadrant, which is expert. Now, this is where you may be sharing an episode on a particular topic, or you may invite a guest on your podcast to share a particular topic that someone is looking to learn more about. So you've done all of the right things to put together a podcast episode that gets found, and that particular person, you or your guest, is seen as that expert, provides some really great value. However, the audience may not necessarily know, like, and trust you yet, but be there just to listen. And that's the difference between being able to position yourself as an expert. But if you've got the right customer, the journey considered, you know exactly, if you get someone on your podcast and you provide real great value, the next step, the next best step that they're taking is this. And you invite them at the end of, with your call to action, which we're going to talk about in another workshop in the coming days, they will most likely take that step. And so there's things that you can create too, because I often say people come for the topic, but they'll return for the host, you, even if you are interviewing a guest. And the reason is that the way you're interviewing them with purpose, you're interviewing them with intention, the way that you hold the stage, so to speak, the way that you not overbear the guests, but the way that you come in with different questions, you add even more value to the conversation. You're able to move the conversation quickly and add your spin on it as well without overpowering, as I mentioned, your guest. That's when people go, I love the way that that host managed the call, love their, you might have a sense of humor, or for some of you, it might be more dry sense of humor, whatever that works for you. Your inner brilliance really shines through. And that is why people will come back to listen to your podcast. And that's what often will happen. They'll listen to an episode and they'll say, oh, I like that. What else is this host? Oh, I'm interested in that topic. So they'll listen to that podcast episode. And then before long, they've subscribed and they've most likely binge listened to all of your episodes. That's what I hear time and time again. People come for the topic, but they return for the host, you, so that you become not just a choice, but the choice when it comes to your podcast. And then eventually the service offerings that you have too, because your podcast is a way that you've been able to journey alongside your ideal client. So becoming that trusted authority starts with you. This is day 2 of our 9-day challenge. It's all about how to go from invisible to influential trusted authority with a podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to transform your expertise as a coach, as a consultant, from a want to a need. What's the difference? Well, a client may want your products and services, but when they need it, it becomes something that they really need right now. I liken it to, as women, when we see a handbag or we see a pair of shoes that we want, but when we need them, we will move heaven and earth, won't we? And look at our budgets and twist things around till we're able to get those things. That's what we want when we have ideal clients looking and listening to your content and what you offer them, so that it's not just a want, but a need. You're the only choice. And as we said here, from an overwhelming number of choices to becoming the only choice, while also having a binge listen or worthy podcast that positions you as a trusted authority. There we go. Let's dive into the distinction model, but particularly today, the message. The message is so important. And as we identified with some of the ahas, it was around that message that really was important. And this is when it comes to your message, less is more. And the first less is more that I wanted to talk about, especially when it comes to coaches and consultants, because this is something that I often see, is that we overwhelm our clients with our content, or our community and our audience with our content, because we want them to know everything that we know, because we've done a lot of learning. Many of us are avid learners. So we've learned a lot of different modalities and ways to support people. And so what might have taken us 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever, your life's journey, you don't and cannot expect to share that all in one 20-minute podcast or in one article. Let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the core components within the message. And I'm going to talk about your umbrella statement today. I'm going to talk about your markers and milestones, which is your invisible thread, kind of your story, as well as some signature sayings and slogans, what they are. When you create your umbrella statement, an outcome-focused statement that showcases your promise of value, what you offer clients, and a promise of expectation. The promise of value is you showcasing and sharing with them that you have the solution. You're able to support them in the area that they're struggling with. And the promise of expectation is, as you're sharing your message, they can almost future pace themselves. They can see themselves in the future having achieved that goal, because that's what your umbrella statement does when you've got a really clearly defined one. So the next is your invisible thread. And this sits under the umbrella statement. Actually, it's a number of different things there, your invisible thread, which is really your markers and milestones. So markers, these are significant events, so challenges, things that you've struggled with, that you've had to overcome by creating new ways or innovative methodologies or a set of unique steps. which you now teach your clients. We're talking about milestones. These are the successes and achievements that have come about through you addressing that challenge and using your systems and the steps that you will now teach clients. And they have to be relevant to your ideal client that want that outcome as well. And they must validate your teaching and your methodologies and be positioned uniquely from everyone else in your industry. But this is day 3, how to go from invisible to influential trusted authority with a podcast, even if you are in a crowded marketplace. Now, this is specific. If you're a coach or a consultant, you have probably got many, many other coaches and consultants who are operating in your space. But one of the things that I have said for many, many years, and many other people do have as well, and it's true, and it's just a reminder that whilst there are many other people in your industry that are offering similar services to you, there is so much business out there in the world. And so you need to look at what we're doing today and throughout this whole 9-day workshops and challenge. When you're thinking about a podcast, there are hundreds and thousands of podcasts that are speaking about a similar topic to a similar client as you. But when you go through the steps that I have showed in day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and really start to get clear on these things, really begin to implement these within your business, you will carve out a niche, a lucrative niche that resonates. And who resonates, I should say, because your niche is your ideal client. There's more, there's a better way. And that's what I want to talk about today, your IP and your signature system. So let's dive in. What is IP? You know that it stands for intellectual property. It's stuff that you have created and have come up with. And I call it your signature system. So your ideal client is looking for a solution that can support them. And that is what your signature system can support you in doing for them. So your signature system is really just, keeping it simple, a step-by-step pathway that can take your client through, or that you take your client through, in order to take them from, point A to point G, or whatever point that you're working in, from stuck to unstoppable. And then if you look at some of my signature systems and then the models that I teach, bringing and layering the podcast strategy over the top of your core business foundations to build your reach with your ideal client, to build your reputation as that trusted authority, an influential trusted authority, and your revenue as you nurture listeners into leads from your very first episode, it takes some more steps, some more systems. And so I have 3 core frameworks, if you will, or models that I use. There's the podcast profit formula, there's the formula, the framework, the funnel, the pipeline. Let's talk about Kashmir Modi. She went through the Core Business Foundations program. Love to interview you and find out what's happening in your world. And so I've captured just a snippet of what she said, but I want you to have a look at this diagram here, which she now calls the Learning Essence Program Pathway. And she recognized that going through the process and understanding the steps that her clients were taking, and then having a look at what she was offering clients, she had a huge aha, and she realized that she was offering support to clients who are at the beginning of the journey and then at the end of their journey, and there was nothing in between. So she was leaving dollars on the table because she didn't have a sequence or a process program pathway that would support clients as they needed to up level, to upscale. What's next, Kashmira? What we've been doing is really talking about message. We've been talking about brand. We've been talking about how do we get all of the things in your head, your certifications, your experience. And some of that experience may not necessarily be relevant. Or when I say relevant, it's not in the industry that you are now working in your coaching and consulting practice, but rather things that you've learned and developed in other industries and other situations, involvements, maybe even in corporate. It's still very relevant. And how do we package all of that together? Let's pack some more learnings on top of this for you. So how do you define momentum? I went online, and as you You typically do, and you have a look, what are some of the ways that they have defined momentum? I think of business momentum really is the impetus that drives your business growth. It's like that snowball effect, isn't it? You imagine that you're starting to, or even let's use a car. Let's use a car. So what you're doing is you've got a car there and you start building all the pieces. You put the wheels together. This is your business, by the way. And then you get ready and then you start pushing that car. And then it starts rolling a little bit and you think, fantastic. And then all of a sudden, there's another car. I think I'm going to start to build that car. And so off you are there. You drag your tools along there and you start putting the wheels together. And then the windows, by the way, us explorers will know this. We're talking about climbing mountains, isn't it? But we're using a car because it's kind of got that momentum. And then we start to push that. And then we're pushing that car forward. And then that starts to roll a little bit. Hey, this is fantastic. And then all of a sudden, there's another vehicle there. I'm going to start building that. That looks really interesting. So you get the idea. We're not building the momentum because when what happens is we go, hang on, what's happened to that first car? I think I might go and do a little bit of that because someone's actually standing there. They may need a lift in that car. So you go back to that car and you do a little bit more things around that, zhuzh it up a bit. You start pushing it again and it gets that momentum. And then all of a sudden, maybe that person's in the car and then you go to the next car and so on it goes. We want to build the momentum of that car that as we keep pushing, people are getting into that car. And guess what? It's building the momentum. You don't actually need to push it anymore because it's got the momentum that it needs to continue that flow. There must be a scientific term around that, the whatever. But that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're looking at it through the lens of the customer journey. And the customer journey is really just a path of strategic sequential steps and interactions that a customer goes through with a company, with you, a product or a service as they continue to build, know, like, and trust. And I love to simplify things as much as possible. So I love looking through the lens of a customer journey in 3 simple stages. Stage 1 is building awareness, stage 2, consideration, and stage 3 is decision. So stage 1, awareness. I mean, there are some clients who don't even know that they need help, and they're not even your ideal clients because they don't even know that they're stuck. And actually, as coaches, we know there are some people that love being stuck in their stuckness because guess what? That stuckness gives them the ability to be able to talk about something. We know those people, don't we? But there are other clients who have gotten awareness that, hang on, something's not right. I need support. I'm on this cycle and all of a sudden they hear one of your podcasts or they read a post or there's a graphic quote and they go, oh, that's great. What's this? And that graphic post shares a little bit of a snippet and then it has a link there and it says, come and listen to this episode. So off they click. They're now on your website or now they've downloaded, that episode onto their smartphone and they're listening to it. They now have an awareness of you. And as they're listening to you and you're building rapport, you're building that know, like, and trust with them, you're sharing relevant information that maybe they've probably not heard before in the way that you express it. Because remember, we talked about your brand. Sometimes you can be saying something that they've heard time and time again, but it's the expression of you and how you bring that forward, how you explain it to them through the lens of your markers and milestones that have them understand it in a much deeper way with much more clarity than they have ever had before. And I'm a true believer in right person, right time, right solution. And you just happen to be there. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And then stage 2, they're starting to consider you. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper through the lens of the podcast in a moment, but I just want to explain these different stages so that you're aware of how important they are. They're considering you. They're considering maybe some of the things that you're offering to them. And then stage 3 is really the decision stage. They're deciding whether or not to take that call to action, that step. They're deciding whether or not to work with you, whether now is the right time, and so forth. But each of these stages is different levels of where your ideal client is walking through that journey. So the content you share is going to be different. The information you share is going to be different. And so each of these stages is going to have different nuances, different strategies, if you will, to the content that you kind of share and what you set up. And so when we look at your ideal clients, this is something for you to consider too, because so often we know that we can help our ideal clients. And for some of you, this is when we're talking about the lucrative niche. There are some of your clients who are just going to take way too long to get to that yes, or they're never going to get to the yes. You got 55%. This is kind of a statistic that marketers have come up with when they kind of do a little bit of an evaluation of ideal clients out there in the marketplace. 55% of people are unaware that they even have an issue, and they're certainly not aware of you, and they're never really going to resonate. They're the people that love to, as I said earlier, love to be stuck in their stuckness because it gives them something to speak about. 25% of people are aware, and they are looking, they are searching, and they may just very well happen to stumble across your content, your podcast. 17%, they're in the decision-making mode. So they may either have been searching for a lot longer, or there are some people who are quick decision makers. I'm a relatively quick decision maker. I'll look at some content or whatever. I'll dive in. I'll try out a few things, and I pretty much know if I need it, and then I will invest, because I know that if I take my time to do it on my own, I mean, I've got goals. I've got goals in my vision board. So I want to get there as quickly as I can in the most efficient time that I can as well. 3% of people are actually in buying mode. Now, when we think about your ideal customer, that's even a smaller percentage of that 3%, because not all of those 3% are people who you really can do your best work with. And let's face it, you want to make sure that you position yourself with the ideal client, because you know that they're going to get the best results. And you also want to enjoy working with them. We've all had some clients who we felt like we're dragging them along with them. These are not the type of clients that you want to work with as a coach. They need to want to move and to shift and to do the activities. So when we're talking about momentum through the lens of the distinction model, how can we create something that will enable us to start building the momentum we need, so that we don't feel like we're starting from stationary point? If we think about that car analogy, that car that is just sitting there, but rather that car is rolling, and you don't have to put all of your energy to get it rolling. We do that through creating a compelling, what I call irresistible signature giveaway, a digital asset, which can actually be a physical asset too, because someone can print that out. So when I say digital, it's not just online that people can't touch or smell or feel, but this is what your ideal clients cannot wait to get access to. And guess what? It helps, or it starts to build the relationship with them. It starts the momentum building of that relationship, where they're now aware of you, and it gets them into your nurturing funnel, your pipeline. That's what we're going to talk about today. And the reason why it's so important when we look through the stages of the customer journey, as I mentioned to you, it's stage 1, awareness, stage 2, consideration, and stage 3, decision, that requires different content and a little bit more of an awareness, which is why, for some coaches, in the way they put their content, the content is really positioning as at a level of what you would do if someone was at the decision stage, but you haven't created content that enables someone to get into the consideration stage. And for some of you, you need to focus on building more of the awareness stage to get people aware of the digital asset. So you can see there's a sequence, right step, right sequence, lay the foundations. And when this is automated, when this is in place, that doesn't require you to push a button, to ring up, to do whatever, and it's something that your ideal client can do on their own, that is when you're not even having to be there, and that allows them to start building the relationship with you, and you're not having to actually do the work. How amazing does that sound? So how do we do that with a podcast? Well, your digital asset is your 3-part podcast series, but there's another piece that comes before that, which is what I want to talk about today. They go hand in hand, but this is what you can see happening here from the podcast. Remember, end in mind. Always like to talk end in mind, and then how the pieces of the puzzle fit into that, how the foundations and the steps fit into that. But if we have a look at the podcast profit pipeline, we can see it through the journey of those 3 stages and what a customer would be doing, or ideal customer would be doing as they move through that. Now, the awareness stage is your brand communication wheel. For some of you, you've definitely, a podcast is on your horizon, on your to-do list, on your vision board. You may be writing articles or blog posts. You may be sharing across social media. You may be doing networking in person and online. You may be doing speaking as well. You're building awareness out there. And then what happens is a call to action at the end of that, which gets people into your funnel, into your pipeline, into your nurturing sequence that gives them access to more of you, and you get into more of a teaching mode. You're starting to share things. You're starting to give them ahas and mini wins, because they're hearing things in a way that only you express, that they've never heard before, and they're ready to make that change. Remember, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And then you follow up with some beautiful emails that really just speaks to her or to him, to the point where when you get to that decision stage and you invite them to that, then they'll take that step. And then this continues to work behind the scenes over and over for you. And you don't even need to be there, other than sharing incredible content, which gets people into this beautiful pipeline. And so what I have done is created that 3-part podcast series, as well as a quiz. Are you ready to launch quiz? And that is what I wanted to talk about today. You know, what does that first step, that building of momentum, how do you do that with a quiz? And this is, and I will talk a little bit more about the quiz a little bit later as we unpack this, but this is the quiz that I use. Are you ready to launch your podcast? And there you have different pillars, and each of the pillars has different questions. And when someone is, let's have a look at the very first one here. And you would have seen me share my model, my podcast profit formula yesterday. S plus T plus U equals I to the power of 3. Strategy plus tactic plus U, as in YOU, equals influence, impact, and income. So here's the first question. My unique thought leader message that challenges the status quo in my industry and speaks directly into what my ideal client is struggling with and searching for. So I am totally clear on my unique thought leader message, and that challenges the status quo. And that really speaks directly into what my ideal client is struggling with and searching for. Now, your ideal client or my client will know, well, actually I am, and it is working for me. So I'm going to tick. I'm totally clear on my distinctive thought leader brand, stands out uniquely in the marketplace and cannot be copied by anyone. Oh, actually, no, I can't tick that one. All right, let's have a look at the next one. My Thought Leader podcast series monetization tactic is recorded, set up, and ready to build ongoing influence, impact, and income. What's this Thought Leader podcast series tactic that she's talking about? I don't even know what that is, so I can't tick that one. Let's have a look at the next column, and so on and so forth. That's what you want to create to start building that relationship. So you may be asking, what's this quiz that you're talking about? Now, this is not just an ordinary quiz. This is developed in such a way, and some of you may have already picked that up, that it continues to showcase and validate, which is so important when you're positioning yourself is that influential, trusted authority, a thought leader in your area of expertise. And remember, when I say the phrase thought leader, for some of you, you're going, ooh, how on earth can I stand out from everyone else? I'm not better than everyone else. I'm not saying you're better than everybody else when I say thought leader. I'm talking about you are better placed to support your ideal client through the journey that he or she is struggling with. And your thoughts, your ideas, your systems, your programs, your services can support that client through that journey far better than anybody else. And so you want your content to stand out, to compel your ideal client, because you are the best solution to support them. That's what I'm talking about. Your thoughts want to lead in the minds of your ideal clients because they can see you have something to offer, which of course you do. And of course, this quiz also validates your promise of value and promise of expectation. I spoke more about that in one of the previous workshops. Your quiz also highlights areas of growth, as in gaps, the areas that keeping yourself, ideal client stuck. I just gave you an example of that as I was going through just the first column of the quiz, Are You Ready to Launch? Where it was like unique and uncopyable. Actually, I haven't defined my message that way. And what's this monetization tactic? I've even really got no idea. So I can't tick that either. And so there is, an area of gap there that's already been identified. Now, what it also does is, if we look at this quiz, it gives them a mini win already. As coaches, we know this is huge, isn't it? It's huge because you've been able to support your ideal client just through your quiz. And guess what? If they're downloading it and you're not there already, how amazing is that? You've already been able to help them and you haven't even opened your mouth yet. How's that for coaching? But it's true, isn't it? Because you've just been able to support them in achieving clarity in where they are stuck. And as coaches, we know, don't we, that self-awareness with your ideal client is often the first step toward transformation. How can we begin to fix something that we don't even know is, I'm not going to say broken, but that needs to be reshaped, reformed? We need to change some of the beliefs that we have around something which is not working for us. We know how powerful that is as a coach. And by giving our ideal clients some clarity already, it's like, oh my goodness. It's like us as businesses, when you think about marketing for you as a coach and a consultant, you may not even realize where you are struggling. So what you're doing is you're doing all of the things, the bright, shiny objects. And, as I mentioned, your podcast is a great way to amplify your message. But if your message isn't working, it becomes a bright, shiny object because it's another thing that you've invested your time and energy and attention in that's not going to generate the results that you want. And so similarly with your ideal clients, they may be doing and working on something which is really not the area that they need to work on. As coaches, we know often the areas that our clients are struggling with is not really the area. It's just a consequence, isn't it? It's just an indication that a few things prior need to be looked at first. Let's unpack that first. So what we're doing through the quiz is helping them gain a little bit of clarity. But there's more. There's more. There's always more, isn't it, when it comes to this quiz? This quiz is so powerful that it continues to validate you, your programs and your services, so that you can not only use this as a way to build momentum, you can also use it in your marketing. You can also use it as a sales tool. It really is an incredible sales tool because guess what? You've helped your ideal client with a mini win. You've explored what's keeping her stuck from achieving her goals, given her some self-awareness. And what you've also done, and this is so powerful, because I know as coaches, many of us love coaching, but the word SALES, sales, is kind of a four-letter word, isn't it? But it's not. You're actually helping her see where she is now, and you've created a wonderful bridge to where she is now, where she wants to be, promise of value, promise of expectation. And guess what that bridge is? It's you and your program. And you've been able to do that all from one quiz. Where do you start? I'm glad you asked. I've prepared something earlier. All right. Jokes aside, what we do is we look at the pillars of your signature system. And we created this yesterday. We looked at this yesterday. Remember I told you it's layered learning as you and building foundations. You would not build the walls of a house if you didn't do the footings.
and then the foundations, and then I'm not a builder, so I'm just, but go with me. I know that there's some foundations before the walls go up, before the roof goes on, and so on and so forth. So similarly with your business, how can you start to create those foundations and then build something that continues to build momentum? Well, once you've got your signature system in place, the signature system comes from the markers and milestones and your expertise. You then develop a quiz starting with that signature system. And that's what you go to first. So I'm going to show some examples for you as we then unpack that and you see how valuable it is. You see, you cannot really create a quiz until you're clear on the pillars in your signature system. You can see that you can't really develop your signature system till you really understand who your ideal client is, your markers and milestones, the expertise, the things, the activities that you want to teach, all of that's so important. One builds on the other. But your signature system, once you've got that clear and you know that it is really starting to generate some interest with the community and your ideal clients as you're starting to share content, you take each of those pillars and you develop some key questions around each of those pillars to help your ideal client gain some self-awareness, gain some clarity around, is this an area that she's stuck in? So that's really kind of what it is. You develop a quiz that's around your signature system with some really key questions that's going to dive in deep. As I showed you earlier, with the podcasting, are you ready to launch your podcast quiz? I wanted to show you just across the top there. I shared earlier the podcast profit formula. Then I've got a whole set of questions around the framework, which was the strategy. Remember, I shared that yesterday. So I have a clear strategy on how a podcast will help me cut through the noise to build my reputation as an industry thought leader, build a list of ideal customers from my very first episode, generate ROI quickly on a clear monetization strategy. Now, if my ideal clients can't put a tick to this, then they know that this is an area that they need to focus on. And each of these pillars has a teaching in my coaching programs and how I support clients. Then there's the funnel, the profit pipeline. Then there's technology and digital assets, the things that need to be in place to be able to leverage. And then there's a whole pillar there around production, around publishing, around promoting. So you can see what I have just done is through the lens of the quiz, identified questions that will enable my ideal clients to see whether they've got them in place or not. And guess what? There's nothing more, as I mentioned, empowering than for someone to see where they're stuck. If they don't have a lot of ticks there, it's like, okay, well, now I know where I need to get clear from. I've built the bridge. How am I going to get these things in place? So when someone looks at your quiz, who am I going to ask? Who am I going to get to help me to get these things in place, to build this bridge so that I can walk across it, take all of the learnings with me, the transformation, so that by the time I get to the end of the bridge, I'm winning. You, of course, you. Let's give you another example through the lens of the core business foundations. To confirm to you that I haven't just learned something or picked this up of someone. I did learn the concept of the quiz through one of my mentors many years ago, Kendall Summerhawk, who created some quizzes. But as I started to develop my own, I realized actually there's far more power when you go deeper and you really look at these pillars through the lens of your signature program. So I'm actually using and doing things. So it's not something I've heard and then I'm going to copy that and just bring it in to my own. I've really developed it over the years. So when you have a look at the 5 pillars here, this is what I've been talking about. And they are the core business foundations: your lucrative niche, your signature brand, your signature system, your signature programs. And now we're talking about your digital asset. And underneath each of those, they become modules of my programs. And each of the teachings that I teach within that, there's a specific question that is asking that. So here we go with the lucrative niche. Let's have a look at some of these questions. When it comes to marketing, I struggle to attract my ideal client and I'm not sure why. Yeah, that's me. I've tried lots of ways to promote myself, but nothing has worked well. Yeah, that's me. I'm sharing content, but it's not generating as many leads as I'd like. Yeah. I can be in a room of my ideal clients, introducing myself. No one really shows any interest. Yeah, that happens to me too. I struggle to define my ideal client, both demographically and psychographically. Help. So at that stage, there's a little bit of jargon in there, but it goes to show my ideal clients thinking, yeah, I don't have those things. Well, guess what? You haven't actually really defined your lucrative niche, because when you do, all of those things would be actually, yeah, I do have those in place. So I can't tick any of those. So you can see how powerful that is, that when someone is able to do a bit of a self assessment, they gain self awareness. You've showcased them a promise of value because you've just helped them to have that self awareness, that aha of where they're stuck. And through the promise of value and creating that bridge, and then kind of seeing this is what's possible for you. How can they get support? Through you and your. I've got a number of different quizzes that I have here, and there's nothing more powerful than when you hold up your quiz like this and you start talking about it and say, by the way, if you want a copy of that, go to such and such a link. That's my are you engaging interviewer or in a podcast host? Here's my are you ready to launch your thought leader podcast quiz in person? So I can hold it up. It's something that we can hold physically. And then, of course, here is the Core Business Foundation quiz, which we went through earlier as well. There is nothing more powerful. You can create a whole month, 2 months, actually 12 months worth of content snippets around that in your podcast episodes, in your articles, in your blog posts. Now, if I think of one of my other clients, Piero Medesic, he's the Exceptionality Catalyst. We've been working on his quiz as well. And we've also developed for him, I remember I said to you as part of yesterday, your IP to create your, your core principles as well, which validates your teaching. Why are they so important? This is just a beautiful snapshot of some of the things that we've created for him, his thought leader collateral. But he said, with over, and this is the importance of why you want to spend time in doing this. And he said, with over 2 decades in leadership roles across a multitude of industries, he's been in and out of marketing and branding seminars and personal development and training seminars, left, right, and center. And although the level of marketing and the brand congruency was good, he's now moving towards being uncopyable, because we've gone through what are the learnings, what are the milestones and markers, what are the teachings, what are your core principles that you really are teaching that no one else can copy through the lens of your journey and story. And for him, he's been able to gain that in only 2 months due to the clarity that he's worked through. These things, that the steps that I'm sharing with you really do work, and they position you as that influential, trusted authority, so that you can not only just stand out from the crowd, you stand out for the crowd or in the crowd with your ideal client. So you become the choice versus just a choice amongst many other coaches who are probably amazing coaches. But remember, you're not better than them. You're better placed to help your ideal client. And there is enough business in this world for all of us.